Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a frontier here in Nairobi. We've got the Indian Ocean dipole in full swing. We've had such a lot of rain. Thankfully, the power remains on. Let me start with macro thoughts. This is the price chart of the Austrian century bond maturing in 2117, i.e. Never Never Land. Continues to be one of the best lines around the stalwart. It actually was at a price above 200 at one point. And I think that was the best example of the Wizard of Oz world I've spoken about. Home thoughts, I went back to Deee-Lite. I don't know if you remember them. They were fantastic. I once watched them live in London in my more youthful days. This is an interview, a very rare one, with the singer and the main band leader. And of course, one of my favorite tunes is Good Beat. And have a listen and tell me what you think. Top chefs pick favorite cities around the world for great restaurants. Richard Vines in Bloomberg. Everyone knows you can enjoy wonderful meals in cities such as Paris, New York, London and Tokyo. But what of other dining destinations with fabulous dishes that are more likely to be found in casual bars or bistros than in fancy restaurants? This is a foie gras dish at the Greenhouse. That looks pretty delicious, and this is another dish from Young Joni restaurant in Minneapolis. That looks good as well. The annual Best Buddies Miami Gala. This is from David Yarrow, who is also a fantastic wildlife photographer whom I enjoy. And here is Tobago Wave Caribbean Ernst Haas as well. I still, that late discovery of Carlos Cruz-Diez, who appreciated color as a reality which acts on the human being with the same intensity as cold, heat, sound, and so on, he wrote in 1975. Chromosaturations plunge participants into a series of intense, stimulating and sometimes destabilizing chromatic situations, as he called them. So intense is the light that the colors seem to be felt rather than seen, like heat. Holland Cotter of the New York Times. The sensation is slightly disorientating, dizzying, as if gravity had been tampered with. I said, I don't make paintings nor sculptures, I make platforms for occurrences. They are platforms where colour is being produced, dissolved, degenerated in a perpetual instant. In it, there's no notion of past nor future. In it, the notion of the present moment, just like life. This is an image, Carlos Cruz-Diez, Physichromy, Pan Am 309, chromography on aluminium. And then this is a very short video which I found really quite startling and extraordinary. Colour is not simply the colour of things. It is an evolving situation, a reality which acts on the human being with the same intensity as cold, heat and sound. Political reflections, as I said over the weekend, if President Macron is diagnosing Europe's preeminent threat as militant Islam, then Fortress Europe is already lost to the geopolitical grandmaster Vladimir and his bestie Xi Jinping. And of course we've got the NATO powwow happening as we speak. North Korea Foreign Ministry warns of year-end deadline up to the US what Christmas gift it will select to get. And that seems to have unwound itself now after that love fest. The New Yorker has an incredible, in-depth article by Dexter Filkins, Blood and Soil in Narendra Modi's India. Let me spend the appropriate time going through it. On August 11th, 2 weeks after Prime Minister Modi sent soldiers to pacify the Indian state of Kashmir, a reporter appeared on the news channel Republic TV riding a motor scooter through the city of Srinagar. She was there to assure viewers that whatever else they might be hearing, the situation was remarkably calm. You see banks here in commercial complexes, the reporter Sweta Srivastava said as she wound her way past local landmarks. The situation makes you feel good because the situation is returning to normal and the locals are ready to live their lives normally again. She conducted no interviews. There was no one on the streets to talk to. Other coverage on Republic TV showed people dancing ecstatically, along with the words "Jubilant Indians celebrate Modi's Kashmir masterstroke." Modi had flooded Kashmir with troops and detained hundreds of prominent Muslims, a move that Republic TV described by saying that the leaders who would have created trouble had been placed in government guest houses. The change in Kashmir upended more than half a century of careful politics, but the Indian press reacted with nearly uniform approval. Ever since Modi was first elected Prime Minister in 2014, he has been recasting the story of India from that of a secular democracy accommodating a uniquely diverse population to that of a Hindu nation that dominates its minorities, especially the country's 200 million Muslims. The Times of India and other major newspapers began claiming that a majority of Kashmiris quietly supported Modi. They were just too frightened of militants to say so aloud. Even from a moving car, it was clear that the reality in Kashmir veered starkly from the picture in the mainstream Indian press. Soldiers stood on every street corner, machine gun nests guarded intersections, and shops were shuttered on each block. The police and soldiers were using small-gauge shotguns called pellet guns by the locals, and some of the victims had been blinded. "Go to the ophthalmology ward," the doctor said. After a few minutes she returned and motioned for me and Rai to follow. "Ward 8, she said. 30 gunshot victims were inside. Muslim-Hindu harmony was central to the vision of India's founders, Mohandas Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, who laid the foundations for a secular state. India is home to all the world's major religions. Muslims constitute about 14% of the population. In 1925, K.B. Hejawar, a physician from central India, founded the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, an organization dedicated to the idea that India was a Hindu nation and that Hinduism's followers were entitled to reign over minorities. In January 1948, soon after independence, Gandhi was assassinated by Nathuram Vinayak Godse, a former RSS member and an avowed Hindu nationalist. Among the lower caste recruits was an 8-year-old named Narendra Modi from Vadnagar, a town in the state of Gujarat. Modi belonged to the low-ranking Ganchi caste, whose members traditionally sell vegetable oil. Modi's father ran a small tea shop near the train station, where his young son helped. When Modi was 13, his parents arranged for him to marry a local girl, but they cohabited only briefly, and he did not publicly acknowledge the relationship for many years. Modi soon left the marriage entirely and dedicated himself to the RSS as a pracharak, the group's term for its young, chaste foot soldiers. Modi started by cleaning the living quarters of senior members, but he rose quickly. In 1987, he moved to the RSS's political branch, the BJP. When Modi joined, the party had only 2 seats in parliament. It needed an issue to attract sympathizers, and it found one in an obscure religious dispute in the northern city of Ayodhya. Was a mosque called Babri Masjid, built by the Mughal Emperor Babur in 1528. After independence, locals placed Hindu idols inside the mosque and became convinced that it had been built on the former site of a Hindu temple. A legend grew that the god Ram, an avatar of Vishnu, often depicted with blue skin, had been born there. Advani was arrested before he reached Ayodhya, but other BJP members carried on, gathering supporters and donations along the way. On December 6, 1992, a crowd led by RSS partisans swarmed Babri Masjid and using axes and hammers began tearing the building down. By nightfall it had been completely razed. I felt helpless, Rana told me. We were like toys, moved from one place to another by someone else. For the RSS, the initiative in Ayodhya paid off spectacularly. Membership soared, and by 1996, the BJP had become the largest party in parliament. During the dispute over Babri Masjid, Ashish Nandi, a prominent Indian intellectual, began a series of interviews with RSS members. A trained psychologist, he wanted to study the mentality of the rising Hindu nationalists. One of those he met was Narendra Modi, who was then a little-known BJP functionary. Nandi interviewed Modi for several hours and came away shaken. His subject, Nandi told me, exhibited all the traits of an authoritarian personality, puritanical rigidity, a constricted emotional life, fear of his own passions, and an enormous ego that protected annoying insecurity. During the interview, Modi elaborated a fantastical theory of how India was the target of a global conspiracy in which every Muslim in the country was likely complicit. Modi was a fascist in every sense, Nandi said. I don't mean this as a term of abuse, it's a diagnostic category. On February 27, 2002, a passenger train stopped in Godse, a city in Gujarat. It was coming from Ayodhya, where many of the passengers had gone, to visit the site where Babri Masjid was destroyed 10 years earlier, and to advocate for building a temple there. Most of them belonged to the religious wing of the RSS, called the VHP. While the train sat at the station, Hindu travellers and Muslims on the platform began to heckle one another. As the train pulled away, it stalled and the taunting escalated. At some point, someone, possibly a Muslim vendor with a stove, threw something on fire into one of the cars. The flames spread and the passengers were trapped inside. When the door was finally pushed open, the rush of oxygen sparked a fireball. Some 58 people suffocated or burned to death. As word of the disaster spread, the state government allowed members of the VHP to parade the burned corpses through Ahmedabad, the state's largest city. Hindus, enraged by the display, began rampaging and attacking Muslims across the state. Mobs of Hindus prowled the streets, yelling, "Take revenge and slaughter the Muslims." According to eyewitnesses, rioters cut open the bellies of pregnant women and killed their babies. Others gang-raped women and girls. In at least one instance, a Muslim boy was forced to drink kerosene and swallow a lighted match. Ehsan Jaffrey, an elderly Congress Party politician, was paraded naked and then dismembered and burned. The chief minister of the Gujarati government was Narendra Modi, who had been appointed to the position 5 months before. As the riots accelerated, Modi became invisible he summoned the Indian army but held the soldiers in their barracks as the violence spun out of control. On the fourth day, a crowd of thousands gathered around the Akwada Madrassa, a Muslim school which had about 400 children inside. The vigilantes were brandishing swords and torches. They were acting in an organized way, Sharma said. They were going to kill the children. Sharma ordered the men to use lethal force to prevent an attack. When warning shots had no effect, they fired, killing 2 men and injuring several more. The crowd scattered, and Sharma escorted the children to safety. In nearly every other district, though, the violence carried on unchecked. Sharma, instead of being celebrated as a hero, was transferred out of the district to a make-work desk job. L.K. Advani, the advocate of destroying the mosque in Ayodhya, who had risen to be India's home minister, called Sharma and suggested he had let too many Hindus die. Asked about this, Modi said relief camps are actually child-making factories. Those who keep on multiplying the population should be taught a lesson. No sectarian riot ever happens in India unless the government wants it, Manda told me. This was a state-sponsored massacre. He had attended a meeting at Modi's bungalow at which Modi ordered senior police officials to allow people to vent their frustration and not come in the way of the Hindu backlash. A police official named Sanjeev Bhatt recalled that at another meeting that night, Modi had expressed his hope that the Muslims be taught a lesson to ensure that such incidents do not recur. After Bhatt made his accusation, he was charged in the death of a suspect in police custody, a case that had sat dormant for more than 2 decades, and sentenced to life in prison. In 2003, the cabinet minister Harian Pandya was found dead in his car in Ahmedabad. His wife had little doubt about who she believed was behind it. My husband's assassination was a political murder. If we raise the self-respect and morale of 50 million Gujaratis, he said, the schemes of Alis, Malis and Jamalis will not be able to do us any harm. The crowd let out a cheer. The BJP was a dead party, Ayyub told me. The only chance they had to power was Modi, because he had all these followers, all these big businessmen, and so the riots were all forgotten. In 2007, when Modi appeared on the Indian network CNN IBN, the journalist Karan Thapa asked him, why can't you say that you regret the killings? What I have to say I've said at that time, Modi replied, his face hardening. As Thapa kept pressing, Modi grew agitated. I have to rest. I need some water. Then he removed his microphone and walked away. In 2013, when another reporter asked if he felt sorry about the deaths of so many Muslims, he suggested he had been a helpless bystander. If someone else is driving a car and we're sitting behind, even then if a puppy comes under the wheel, will it be painful, Modi said. Of course it is. Modi became a hero for all the Hindus of India, Nirjahari Sinha, a scientist in Gujarat. That is what people tell me at parties, at dinners. People genuinely feel that Muslims are terrorists, and it is because of Modi that Muslims are finally under control. In 2010, in a series of cover stories for Tehika, Ayyub tied Modi's closest advisor, Amit Shah, to a sensational crime. The scion of a high-caste family, Shah had trained as a biochemist but excelled as a political tactician. A one-time president of the Gujarat Chess Association, he had twice helped engineer Modi's election as the top official in Gujarat. Afterward, he was made the Minister of State for Home Affairs. There were witnesses, including Sheikh's wife and a criminal associate of his. But a couple of days after the killing, his wife was murdered and her body burnt. The associate was killed in police custody a year later. The next time they met in a graveyard at 3 a.m. with Ayyub disguised in a burqa, he gave her a CD hidden in a bouquet of flowers. It contained 6 years of Shah's telephone records, including the times and locations of his calls. Using the records, Ayyub showed that Shah and the 3 officers suspected of murdering Sheikh's associate had been in extensive contact before and after the killing. Her reporting also offered an explanation of Shah's motive. A police official told her that the murdered criminals knew something that could have been damning for the minister. The headline of one of her stories was, "So why is Narendra Modi protecting Amit Shah?" Congress people say that Modi is indulging in encounters, saying that Modi kills Sohrabuddin. He told a crowd of supporters, "You tell me, what should I do with Sohrabuddin?" he asked. "Kill him," the crowd roared. "Kill him." She became Matahili Tyagi, an Indian-American student at the American Film Institute Conservatory in Los Angeles, visiting India to make a documentary. Modi's biggest support comes from Gujarat, the American, she told me. I said I want to meet the most influential people who can tell me the Gujarat story, who will tell me the secret sauce of Mr. Modi has done in the past 15 years. Modi showed her copies of Barack Obama's books. He said, "Mateli, look at this. I want to be like him someday," she recalled. She was struck by his canniness. "I thought Modi was either going to be Prime Minister or he was going to jail." By 2012, Modi had become the most recognizable BJP leader in India and seemed likely to run for Prime Minister. Everyone saw the writing on the wall, Ayyub said. Modi was going to win, and no one wanted to alienate him. As Modi began his run for Prime Minister in the fall of 2013, he sold himself not as a crusading nationalist, but as a master manager, the visionary who had presided over an economic boom in Gujarat. His campaign slogan was, "The good days are coming." The accelerated growth was a fantastically crafted fiction, according to Prasad. Rahul Gandhi, the head of the party and Nehru's great-grandson, was dubbed the reluctant prince by the Indian media. Congress leaders often behaved as if they were entitled to rule. BJP's leaders presented themselves as ascetic, committed and incorruptible. Modi, who said to do several hours of yoga every day, typically wore simple kurtas, and members of his immediate family worked in modest jobs and were conspicuously absent from senior government positions. Whatever other allegations floated around him, he could not be accused of material greed. Modi's efforts to transform his image succeeded in the West as well as in the United States. Newspaper columnists welcomed his emphasis on markets and efficiency. In addition, Modi called on a vast network of Indian Americans who cheered his success at putting India on the world stage. Not long after Modi took power, the Sohrabuddin Sheikh case, in which his old friend Amit Shah was implicated, ground to a halt. By 2014, Shah had essentially stopped showing up for hearings. When the judge ordered Shah to appear, the case was taken away from him in defiance of the Supreme Court. By the time the charges were dropped, Modi had installed Shah as president of the BJP and chairman of the governing coalition, effectively making him the country's second most powerful man. She called it the Gujarat Files, anatomy of a cover-up. According to Ayyub, Narayan said that Modi had decided to allow the Hindu nationalists to parade the bodies of the victims of the train attack. Ayyub showed me a tweet about the porn video from Vallabh Agarwal, a media personality who often speaks on behalf of the BJP. It read, "You want to dance in the rain, get all wet, and not want to then have pneumonia." Pratik Sinya, a former software engineer and the founder of Alt News, which tracks online disinformation, described a nimble social media operation that works on behalf of the BJP. In 2017, his group made a typical discovery when a pro-BJP website called Hindutva Info released a video of a gruesome stabbing, which was passed around on social media as evidence that Muslims were killing Hindus in Kerala. Punet Sharma, an RSS apparatchik whom Modi follows on Twitter, promoted the video, saying it should make Hindus' blood boil. But when Alt News tracked the video to its source, it turned out to depict a gang killing in Mexico. Sinha told me he believes that some of the most aggressive social media posts are instigated by an unofficial IT cell. staffed and funded by BJP loyalists. He said that people affiliated with the BJP maintain websites that push pro-Modi propaganda and attack his enemies. They are organized and quick, he said. They got their act down a long time ago in Gujarat. As Modi consolidated his hold on the government, he used his power to silence mainstream outlets. In 2016, his administration began moving to crush the television news network NDTV. In 1988, the station had been one of the liveliest and most credible news channels. This spring, as votes were tallied in the general election, its website received 16.5 billion hits in a single day. NDTV recently laid off some 400 employees. The journalists who remain say they don't know how long they can persist. These are dark times. In June, the Business Standard reported Modi's government had been inflating GDP growth figures by a factor of nearly 2. The report prompted a public outcry, but Modi did not apologize, and no official was forced to resign. Modi supporters often get their news from Republic TV, which features shouting matches, public shaming, scathing insults, and all but the most slavish Modi partisans. Next to it, Fox News resembles the BBC's News Hour. Backed by his allies in business, Modi ran a campaign that was said to cost some $5 billion. Its exact cost is unknown, owing to weak campaign finance laws. As the vote approached, Modi was losing momentum, hampered by an underperforming economy. On February 14th, a suicide bomber crashed a car laden with explosives into an Indian military convoy in Kashmir, killing 40 soldiers. The attack energized Modi. He gave a series of bellicose speeches insisting the blood of the people is boiling. He blamed the attack on Pakistan, India's arch rival, and sent thousands of troops into Kashmir. Ordered airstrikes against what he claimed was a training camp for militants in the town of Balakot. Sympathetic outlets described a momentous victory. They pumped out images of a devastated landscape, and citing official sources claimed that 300 militants had been killed. But Western reporters visiting the site found no evidence of any deaths. There were only a handful of craters, a slightly damaged house, and some fallen trees. In a country where hundreds of millions are illiterate or nearly so, the big idea got through. Modi rose in the polls and coasted to victory. The BJP won a majority in the lower house of parliament, making Modi the most powerful prime minister in decades. And Shah, Modi's deputy, told a group of election workers that the party's social media networks were an unstoppable force. Do you understand what I'm saying? He said. We are capable of delivering any message we want to the public, whether sweet or sour, true or fake. Singh told me that he and his men were duty-bound to defend cows from an epidemic of theft and killing. For several minutes he spoke about the holiness of the cow. Each animal, he said, contains 360 million gods, and even its dung has elixirs beneficial to humans. They cut them, they kill them, Singh said of Muslims. It's a conspiracy. Muslims were lynched. Modi typically says nothing, and since he rarely holds press conferences, he is almost never asked about them. It's an absolutely incredible story. After Muzaffar and Ali were released, their father took them to the local hospital. They've broken my bones, Muzaffar said. I can no longer prostrate myself before God. Many Kashmiris still refuse to accept Indian sovereignty, and some recall the promise made by the United Nations in 1948 that a plebiscite would determine the future of the state. Kashmir was assigned special status enshrined in Article 370 and afforded significant powers of self-rule. For the most part, those powers have never been realized. So, as I said in my latest article, Narendra Modi, whose calling card was economic growth in Gujarat, notwithstanding his fondness for a good old-fashioned pogrom, has embarked on a West Bank level settlement project of Kashmir. I was quoting Sandeep Chakravorty, who said, who told Kashmiri Hindus that India will build settlements modelled after Israel for the return of the Hindu population in Kashmir. 3 years ago, India was enjoying economic growth of about 9%. Now the rate of expansion has slumped to just half that. Economic growth has fallen for 6 consecutive quarters, a slide that can be partially attributed to the recent weakness of Indian factories. GDP figures the weakest record under Modi, who first swept to power 5 years ago, promising to take India's economy to new heights and create millions of jobs every year. I believe the politics of ethnocratic nationalism are a bust, and that he is essentially seeking to flood the zone. The smartphone is ubiquitous even in the furthest corners of the world, I wrote in August, and we're all peering at a newsreel, except of course if you're in Kashmir, which was described by Nehru as the snowy bosom of the Himalayas, and which is currently switched off from the 21st century. Prime Minister Narendra Modi revoked Article 370, which protected Kashmir's demography by restricting residency to Kashmiris alone, and under a subsection known as Article 35A, forbade the sale of property to non-Kashmiris. Essentially, Modi is seeking to flood the zone, and I was talking about the periphery being a tinderbox in many parts of the world, Xinjiang, Gaza Strip, Ukraine, more than you can mention. I quoted Iqbal, "In the bitter chill of winter shivers his naked body, whose skill wraps the rich in royal shawls." Xing 2, China's new missile threat, General John Hyten, "We don't have any defense that could deny the employment of such a weapon against us," Asia Times Online. The DF-17, China's greatly feared hypersonic missile that was first revealed at the National Day military parade on October 1st, might not be the only hypersonic aircraft program China possesses, a report by the state broadcaster suggested. Referred to as the first Chinese Wave Rider hypersonic vehicle unveiled by the country, dating a year earlier than the DF-17. And essentially this goes to, and I wrote about this, I was quoting Zhu, "This is the legendary DF-41 ICBM. It is not a tale. Today it is displayed at Tiananmen Square. Just respect it and respect China that owns it." And whereas America once had the buffer of being able to simply pull a carrier strike group close to the shore and hammer an enemy, its near-peer adversaries can now theoretically push the fleet outside standoff range, and this is what these intercontinental ballistic missiles can do. New hardware like China's DF-26 missile overnight changed the operational paradigm and thus policy. That's man_integrated. My article was about a global economic downturn, and I was saying there is no abracadabra, and the global economy feels like that moment when everyone was dancing in the ballroom on the Titanic just before the iceberg hit. Let's go to currency markets. Euro 110.78, dollar index 97.865, Japanese yen 109.14, Swiss franc 0.9925, the pound 129.46, the Aussie 0.6845, India rupee 71.5835, South Korean won 11.8706, Brazilian real 422.36, Egyptian pound 16.11, and the rand top of the range at 14.55. We had a bit of a sell-off in the dollar yesterday. Euro dollar, this chart is from FX Pip Titan, now at 110.78, and I think headed above 111. Hong Kong retail sales slump again as chaos cripples economy. Hong Kong's retail sales suffered a record contraction in October as the city counts the cost of almost 6 months of political unrest. Retail sales by value contracted by 24.3% in the month from a year earlier, the fourth month of double-digit declines. By volume, sales contracted by 26.2%, also a record, according to a government release. And I wrote about this in October when I said prolonged standoffs eviscerate economies, reducing opportunities and accelerate the negative feedback loop. I was quoting Paul Virilio, "The revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form not in the place of production, but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor machine of attack, in other words, a producer of speed." Netflix weekly huge rising wedge, Faris Baba, who's very bearish about it, and we had a little disagreement about it. As I said on the 23rd of September when it was at $270, it's now just below 310, that I was putting out a conviction buy. at that price. People went from broad to narrow. I was quoting an article from the New Yorker Annal of Technology, Streaming Dreams, and we think they will continue to go that way, spend more and more time in the niches, because now the distribution landscape allows for more narrowness. Essentially, I think Netflix is an international story, and I think there is more competition, but no one has the roster or the experience that Netflix has. They all think it's easy money, and I don't think it's going to turn out that way for the competition. Gold, $14.61 trading. Crude oil, $56.20 after that very torrid Friday. We've recovered about 40% of that sell-off. Sub-Saharan Africa's South Sudan seeks funds for peace, $1 billion spending spree. This is OCCRP. South Sudan hasn't paid its government employees, including doctors, teachers and lawmakers, for several months. It says it simply can't afford to. UN says more than 4 million, about 1/3 of the population, are displaced from their homes. South Sudan's GDP has plummeted from 13 billion at the start of the civil war to just 3 billion as of 2016. New government will have to service a massive debt, much of it which is secured against the country's oil reserves. Juba is spending well beyond its means. Earlier this year, the country's parliament recommended cutting 10% of its meagre peace fund to help pay for a new presidential jet and a $50,000 healthcare allowance for each lawmaker. According to contracts, bank records, government correspondence obtained by OCCRP, the government awarded procurement contracts worth $1.4 billion to supply food and vehicles to the government and the National Army between 2016 and 2018. It's a very detailed report. These amounts are so vast it would have been impossible for the government to pay them in full. In his July 2018 budget speech, Finance Minister Garang estimated that only about $520 million in revenue was available to the government that year. These contracts exceeded budgeted spending limits. The value of one of the smaller contracts exceeded South Sudan's entire military budget for goods and services for that year by a factor of 10. Financing for others was secured through pre-sales of oil, a widely criticized practice that saddled the struggling country with massive debts. These arrangements were also made without the required approval and oversight. Number of winners within the elite has dwindled to a small group of people, mostly from communities near the president's home area, who are receiving most of the benefits. A recent government report documents massive defense spending that overlaps with the time period when several of the contracts were awarded. Central bank withdrawal slips obtained by OCCRP show that these well-connected insiders, Khor Ajing Atta, received at least $23 million of public funds, mostly in dollars, withdrawn as cash. Noted that the Defense Ministry's designated budget couldn't cover the cost and it had no plan to train soldiers to use the new equipment. In fact, South Sudan's entire approved budget for military goods and services that year was 1.4 billion South Sudanese pounds. This single contract, worth around 12.5 billion South Sudanese pounds at the budgeted exchange rate, would therefore exceed approved military spending by a factor of 10. In October, the government awarded a $539 million contract. Change was dramatic. Then there's this whole exchange rate business because the currency collapsed. Commodity traders are not just trading, they're lending on a vast scale. So essentially, they're getting the money from the forward sale of oil. But it's well worth reading in full. It's really frightening. This is a photograph I took of the River Nile when I visited Juba. And I wrote many years ago, leadership in South Sudan is simply unqualified and unable. They need to be removed. Russia's growing influence in Africa we've written about. Not since the Cold War has Moscow exerted so much influence from Angola to Zanzibar. Many US embassies have left with no ambassador or core staff. The US ambassador to South Africa, one of the most important diplomatic positions on the continent, only arrived in October, more than 3 years late. With the US on the back foot, Russia has taken advantage of the chance to challenge China's power in Africa. By financing public infrastructure projects in poorer nations, China has has brought several African countries into its economic orbit through debt. This debt trap diplomacy is compounded by China's technological dominance. With little focus on technology and infrastructure, Russia exerts its influence primarily through military assistance, private mercenaries, and the media. As well as the military deals and training partnerships with almost half of Africa's nations, there are the nuclear energy partnerships with Egypt, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Zambia. Tanzania recently signed a cooperation agreement in which Russian forces provide military training in exchange for permission to develop and test system weapons in the country. Other deals have been signed in Niger, Nigeria, Sudan, Mali, Madagascar, and Eritrea. Russia's trade with Africa grew from 17.4 billion in 2017 to 20.4 billion in 2018. I wrote an article from Russia with Love, and in there I was saying Russia is now Africa's leading supplier of arms. Andrew Korobiko was talking about the political technologists who've reportedly devised bespoke solutions for confronting incipient and ongoing colour revolutions. And I also said, where Z is fed up and speaks about the end of vanity because the ROI outside commodities and telecoms is negative, Putin has created a hybrid model with an exponential ROI. Borrowing makes sense if it's done wisely, said the IMF, if it finances projects that can help boost productivity and living standards such as roads, schools, and hospitals. Over the past 2 decades, extreme poverty levels have declined by 1/3, life expectancy has increased by 1/5, and real per capita income has grown by about 50% on average. Saying it's therefore clear to all of us that countries will not be able to borrow their way to the SDGs, which brings me to the balanced approach. Saying second tactic is to make investment spending more efficient. The reality is that only about 60% of the region's infrastructure spending translates into public capital stock. For every dollar spent, you're getting only about 60 cents worth of assets, which is the problem. I was writing about this on the 14th of October, and I was quoting Ozymandias, and I saying, this all turns Ozymandias, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. More than 60% of the increase in public debt in sub-Saharan Africa between 2010 and 2018 was debt contracted on domestic and international capital markets, which is clearly part of the problem. Ethiopia, to keep control of its banks as other sectors open up, is shaking up its economy by opening many industries to foreign investors. Just don't expect the government to loosen its grip on banks yet. Banking, insurance, microcredit, and micro-saving services will be reserved only for domestic investors. As I've said, I'm a big admirer of Prime Minister Abiy. 90 days into his term, I said these 90 or so days represent the most consequential arrival of an African politician on the African stage since Mandela walked out of prison, blinking in the sunlight, and constructed his rainbow nation. I also said he faces a fiendishly complicated task, fending off the centripetal forces which are tearing Ethiopia apart. Mnangagwa's sycophants will tell us here that he is better than Robert Mugabe, but here is the difference. That's from Daddy Hope. On the left, Morgan Tsvangirai planting a tree. On the right, Nelson Chamisa being shot at when he was trying to plant a tree. As I said, Emerson Mnangagwa, who was eulogizing Mugabe as a revolutionary icon, has failed and is frankly as untenable as his erstwhile mentor. The South African all-shares up 3.94% year to date. 1 month at the money options volatility for the rand versus the dollar has plunged to the lowest since November 2014, and it's 373 basis points drop since the beginning of last month. However, we're seeing a steepening of the curve with people looking to buy 6-month protection. The rand itself, let's see in this chart, is at 14.55, which is the very top of the range, which is 14.50. A breakthrough that would take us to below 14. Egyptian pound 16.1193, EGX30 up 3.85% year to date. Nigeria all share down 14.13% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange down 14.41%. Year to date, photo of the day in Beni, North Kivu, DR Congo from MONUSCO. South African peacekeepers and Congolese troops arrested a dozen armed men identified as members of the armed groups in Mai Moya territory. Commercial International Bank of Egypt, which is its largest private lender, wants to buy Kenya's Mayfair Bank. Mayfair is Kenya's fourth smallest lender with a market size of 0.16% according to central bank data. But this is part of that wave of consolidation we've been seeing. Nairobi all shares up 12.84% year to date. The NSC's top 10 top performing stocks. Equity Bank is up 44%. Longhorn is up 37%. KCB 33%. Safaricom 32%. Scan Group 27.5%. NCBA Kenya 25%. Stanbic Kenya 23%. Barclays Kenya 17.81%. EABL 13%. Kakuzi 12.9%. Of all the banking stocks, the only one which is in negative territory is DTB, which is down 27.16%. To the point I was making when I began this rather verbose podcast about the Indian Ocean Dipole, this is a photograph of Nairobi posted by Chad Bironga, and you can see what I'm talking about. We're flooded. Thank you for stopping by.